Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. It's your boy, the Diggity Doodah Doc, Mr. Papatoe Panther, here with the Wobbly Wildcard for another episode of the glorious Nishcast, coming to you via the Niche Cache, and we are here to tell you how good, how amazing Aotearoa is in the sporting landscape, and just share our thoughts on all the glorious Kiwi sporting matters that do exist in 2020. Crazy year that it is, but we still got some glorious Kiwi sporting matters on the cards today. Our menu's looking a bit of Steven Adams. We've got a bit of Lydia Ko in the LPGA. We've got a bit of Blackcaps T20 cricketers. We had an NBL grand final. Otago Jets, the winners there. Otago Nuggets, sorry, not the Manawa 2 Jets. That was a bit of a mixture, but it is the Otago Nuggets, who are your 2020 post-pandemic NBL champions. Shout out to them. Standard practice with the NRL and standard practice with the footballing matters as well. Wellington Phoenix had a loss over the weekend, and we've also got our flying Kiwis all over the show as well. If you do appreciate what we are doing at the Niche Cache in celebrating Kiwi sport and celebrating Kiwi music, movies, pop culture, whatever it is, you can jump on Patreon, support us straight up the guts, hit it up hard and fast, direct to us via Patreon. We also do an email that drops Mondays and Fridays, plenty of good juicy content there that on a Monday usually flows over to the podcast as well, so sign up to that. Otherwise, just read our shit, listen to our shit. That's good enough. Wobbly Wildcard, Monday morning. Kia ora koutou. What's crack-a-lackin'?
Yeah, bloody these crazy old Monday mornings that we have now, where we're cranking out an email and a big old podcast, and then getting a jump start on the week's writing. I'm working on Flying Kiwis most of the day. You've got your Monday morning dummy half. We're coming into this kind of like, I was just thinking about this the other day when I was talking to someone, when you get the old like, oh, how's the website going sort of thing in conversation, and sort of saying like, it's really only now that after all the pandemic-y stuff that things are actually getting back into like the actual swing of things beforehand. Like, it's just such a slow build up with leagues sort of staggered in how they're returning and whatever. It's only really now that we're coming up to that like actual like all steam ahead what we were doing beforehand, and yeah, we're targeting these big heavy starts of the week now, and it's good fun, and it's hard work, but yeah, no, all good. Been just watching heaps of NBA recently, like I'll probably might even chuck the Mavs game on the other screen before we finish recording this one. But I don't know. I was thinking watching that, because the first thing when the Oklahoma City Thunder are on, I like from the very start I was like, gotta watch this game, because I gotta be sitting there on the computer ready to go with my print screen button so I can catch a nice screenshot of Steven Adams with a Kaha on the back of his jersey, with all the players wearing like a sort of, you know, socially responsible message now through this restart thing. And Steven Adams with the Kaha was just sort of a really kind of beautiful and almost kind of moving, inspirational kind of thing. Just seeing, you know, Aotearoa represented in that way in the National Basketball Association. Cool things. But I was wondering, like, what would I have on my jersey if I was in that situation? And if I was just playing like a bit part player in an NBA thing, which is already an extremely vague dream to get to this point. But like, what would I do? Probably just, I don't know, if I was taking Steven Adams' lead, maybe I'd just chuck another Kaha on there. Or like, what would I do personally? I don't know. I was thinking about that, and I couldn't really get anywhere where I was like, what could I say that would be, like, what's a message I could put on, like, a song lyric or something? I don't know. What would you do? Like, what would you have on your jersey if they gave you the chance?
There's terms like peace or unity that I think are very adequate in the world that we exist on in 2020. But if you're like Steven Adams, to the best of my knowledge, he's kind of Pākehā and Tongan. So
yeah, correct, he is.
Yeah, so it's he's not even straight up and down Hāti Māori. But I think if you are a Kiwi from any cultural background and you really, really appreciate the land of Aotearoa, I think in that kind of environment, in that context of having something on the back of an NBA jersey with all the eyeballs that are on it, it would have to be some term from the Māori language. Like, it would be rude, or, like, for me personally, it would be rude or disrespectful to not have anything Māori on the back of my jersey. Kia kaha would definitely be up there. Just something like mana might be up there. Māori ora might be up there as well. I'd probably lean into that, lean into my connection to the land of Aotearoa, and tap into those ideals, because to go down a slight tangent, there are, a lot of the spiritual elements of Māori culture, a lot of the human elements of, like, your mana, your personal mana, all of that stuff, or even the concept of hōora, your health, your holistic health, all of that stuff is so helpful to human beings in 2020. It's so applicable to whatever situation you're in as a human right now. Like, if you just literally spend a couple minutes every day thinking about your mana, which is just, your respect and what you put out there, you receive. Like, the better your mana is, the more you're going to receive. You're going to be open to abundance. You're a respected individual. You're putting positive energy out there. Like, if everyone just focused on their mana daily, amazing things would happen. So a lot of the principles, ideas, terms that stem from Māori culture, and a lot of this stems from the land of Aotearoa, I think can be very helpful to people in 2020, and I would be putting that back top center. Not front and center, but back top center on my NBA jersey.
Yeah, I think I would probably, like, in an actual practical sense, I would probably just go with, like, a kia kaha or something like that, because it would mean the most to the most amount of people, and also representing where I came from and all that, which is pretty much exactly what Steven Adams has done. Like, he doesn't actually have, as you say, he doesn't have Māori blood. He has an English father and a Tongan mother, but he does have a lot of Māori half-siblings, and a few of those are who he sort of grew up with as well. So he doesn't have it in the blood, but he does certainly have it in the raising and in the culture that he grew up in as well. So it's still there. Even if it wasn't, it still would be just from being from the country anyway. Something unique to the land and all that. Because when I was thinking about it, I was like, I'd probably want to pick something nice and, like, esoteric, or but then I'm like, what are you gonna do? Like, know thyself or something? Like, to thine own self be true. It's like, well, NBA might not let you have a saying that is, like, also very common in the Satanist church kind of thing. Yeah, I think there might be a couple hiccups on that front. So I don't know. Also, I think it's like, it means a little bit more from some of the white American players as well. The Black Lives Matter as well. It probably is also reaching out further in that way. So yeah, I don't know. There's a few different things. Like, if I was trying to come up with something that I would just like scribble on a piece of paper or something like that, it wouldn't be the same as the thing I would want to put on a jersey that represents, like, that is going to be shown to millions of people around the world. You want to sort of make a statement that affects not just yourself, but affects as many people as you can. So it's quite a cool little concept, actually, because at first, like, watching it is a bit confusing, because I'm looking at these guys, and, for example, like, you just get used to watching sport and reading the names on the back of jerseys to identify players, especially when you haven't seen them play in a while and that kind of thing. So I'm watching the Thunder and thinking, like, and everyone also looks different because they've had, like, 4 months of lockdown. Haircuts are different. Some players have used the time to, like, bulk up a little bit more and things like that. So, like, it's sometimes hard to just identify players off the cuff when someone makes someone, I don't know, cuts to the basket or something like that, and you see the long extended name and you're like, okay, that must have been Gilgeous Alexander. but it's not. It's just someone who has a long phrase on the back of their jersey. That's a bit taken like just a little getting used to. I'm going to have to learn the numbers off by heart a bit more to identify players on the Thunder in particular. At least Steven Adams has never had that problem of not being able to identify him. He stands out in the crowd for sure. But it's quite a cool like concept, giving players just just another example of how to like amplify their voice at a pretty crucial time in, the history of humanity and all that. It might not be a crucial time if we don't like take the right road at this crossroads that we find ourselves in. If we fall back into doing things the way things were done before, it might not end up being a crucial time, but it has the potential to be a crucial time. And there was talk from like amongst the playing group, like a lot of players didn't want to come back if it was going to mean like somehow that this would be getting in the way or being a distraction from the social messages and kind of thing. And I think the NBA's found quite a nice balance of how to integrate that without also going to the point where it's a distraction from the basketball either. Like they've found a real nice balance where a largely like African American playing group is able to have a voice that's amplified, a voice that's being accepted and heard by the league they play for, which, like, let's be honest, majority like rich old white guy owners kind of thing. And there's always been that weird kind of dynamic in the NBA. But it's I don't know. I think they've found it's not an easy balance to find. I think it's deceptively difficult. But I think the NBA's done a pretty good, like as good a job as a sports organization could do with that kind of thing so far anyway.
There are a few NBA players serving up content in the bubble. And I think of that because this morning I was watching Matisse Thybulle's vlog, who's a player for the Philadelphia 76ers, and he included some footage from a little 76ers team meeting where Tobias Harris kind of led a discussion on a lot of these matters, and they had a little just chinwag as a team would do about stuff they want to do, like whether to stand for the national anthem, what to say in post-game interviews and all that stuff. So that was pretty interesting. Matisse Thybulle has a vlog, JaVale McGee has a vlog with the LA Lakers as well, so definitely watch those if you want. Without getting too political, just observing USA from a distance, it does seem like there's a weird stage now where, like, the USA is in crisis on all sorts of different levels. However, I do feel like a lot of the fizz from the social justice issues and movement has kind of decreased, and I think there is a hope that with all the eyeballs on the NBA, that the NBA players, who are predominantly black African Americans, or just straight up Africans, there's a lot of just straight up Africans in the NBA as well, that they can ensure that fizz doesn't decrease, that focus on this issue does not decrease. And I guess what I'm saying is I'm just interested to see the effect and the impact over the next few weeks, because USA is in crisis, and part of that crisis is the social justice issues, but then because of the magnitude of this crisis, it kind of it's not like the only focus is social justice and all the power is behind social justice and racial equality and racial issues in the USA. The whole focus isn't there. The whole energy isn't there. And yeah, it's great that the NBA can lead and the other sports, if they do come back. It's great that they can do stuff like this, but you do wonder, like, what is the tangible impact? Like, because a lot of people just want to see basketball. It's not to say we don't want to see what they're doing. Like, everyone's going to appreciate what the players in the NBA is doing, but at what level does it actually instigate change? At what level does it actually have an influence on how racial issues are viewed in America? And that's just something that we have to watch unfold, because it does feel like there's just so much happening in USA let alone in the sports world, because you've got issues with the NFL, you've got issues with baseball. Like, all these sports are trying to kickstart as well, and you've got the COVID, and you've got racial issues, you've got a state like Washington, and the big city there, Portland, which is just a fucking mess in itself. Like, there's so much going on in USA, let alone with the elections and all that. So, yeah, I just wonder how it all comes together. Maybe if, like, the NBA had a really big focus on vote, like, get out and vote this election, then there's something that you can tangibly, like, measure the influence and measure the impact. Whereas, like, just, not to diminish it, but having slogans, having, initiatives like the NBA, great initiatives that the NBA is doing, like, at what level does that have an influence on the wider USA society? At what level does that have a genuine, felt, measurable impact? And just, interesting times. That just goes into the whole cauldron that is USA in 2020 and the weird old situation that it is in.
Yeah, all valid points, because all valid points, basically. Because, I mean, there's no doubt that the sort of, just the rolling momentum of the movements and stuff has slowed, and that's natural. Like, people can't literally protest every single day of their lives for 6 months or whatever. Like, it had to come a point where they would slow down, where you had to say, well, if the point hasn't been made now, then we'll give it a rest until, the next big whatever, because if nothing changes, there will be a next big whatever, unfortunately. But the slowing down, you just have to kind of trust that it's being absorbed, and that's the reason it's slowing down. Not because people are giving up hope, but because the message is being heard. And so just, like, repeating those kind of things, and, like, slogans mean nothing if you don't have action to back them up. Like, they mean literally nothing. But if you can inspire that action, you can keep that ball rolling just a little further down the hill or whatever. So it does, not getting in the way of the basketball as well, is why I say that balance, because the NBA ultimately can say what they like about all the various things that are going on in the world, but they are still ultimately a sports league that has to run a sport, and it's not really up to the league to be out there throwing opinions and stuff like that into the ether. You leave that up to the players, especially in a league like the NBA, where players are quite rightfully empowered to have voices and stuff like that. So, I don't know, it's hard, because when you start thinking about, like, okay, but what's changed? That's difficult. Like, it's hard to say when you start looking at the very, very big picture. Normally, looking at the bigger picture is the right thing to do, because you get context, you get perspective. But in these kind of things, where, like, democracy is such a slow-moving process, especially at the moment where there's a massive block, for example, in Washington and in the States at the moment, which is not receptive to these kind of ideas. You just got to trust that, like, if you stay in the trenches and keep saying the right things, eventually the right people will hear. And you're not wrong about the voting process. A few players have some, like make sure you vote kind of messages on their jerseys as well. I've seen those. Whether people have the faith that even voting for a better alternative is going to make things tangibly improve, or whether it just stops the disaster, I'm a little bit skeptical. I don't need to go any deeper whatsoever on American politics and the ridiculousness therein, but I will say they had a chance to chuck in old mate Bernie, and they blew it, so that's America's fault. They're dramas. I don't know. Should we get on to some lounging stuff, because this is otherwise going to get a little bit depressing?
Well, I will say, like, another key factor is here. We both know that the NBA is the most forward-thinking league in America and USA. NBA is at the front of a lot of these issues and matters in USA society. The NBA is the leader. they were the leader in implementing a bubble, but more in as far as how these sports leagues operate in the changing times that we are in. And so it's very easy for the NBA to do these things.
Yeah.
Things are going to be very interesting, Wildcard, as you would know better than I do, when the NFL tries to spark back up, because there's some very weird cultural dynamics with the NFL. And I actually realized that wholeheartedly when I was thinking like about NFL as a sport versus rugby and rugby league. Like rugby union and rugby league are just far better product. They're more entertaining, more free flowing. Just, I view them as just better sports. But the reason neither rugby league or rugby union will not be a factor in USA sport is because NFL is ingrained in the culture of USA. And you could go on about this for days, for years, so I won't throw it back to you, but I will just say, like, that being ingrained in the USA for the NFL is great for the NFL, but it opens up a can of worms with the current landscape we're working with, and everything's pretty honky-dory for the NBA because they put themselves in that position, whereas the NFL is straggling behind and has a very weird cultural dynamic in the USA at this time.
That can be a flip side for the NBA, though, because it also might mean they're in a situation where, like, everyone's saying the right things, but are they preaching to the choir because their audience is going to be mostly like-minded individuals as well? Like, there's probably not a lot of overt, like, MAGA hat-wearing Trump supporters who watch the NBA.
It's a bit like Twitter.
Like Twitter, yeah. Twitter is the NBA and Facebook is the NFL, and the NFL has, I mean, I've heard some interesting things on podcasts about the NBA about how there are a lot of like Republican-leaning owners, which is natural because people get extremely rich. They get quite selfish about how rich they are. They want to vote out of selfish means for the party that will protect them and not put and give them tax breaks and things like that and whatever. It's all like dumb, selfish politics, which is always frustrating. But like the NFL has that in a player base, and the interesting point that you just sort of sparked in my mind talking about the NFL with a cultural base in America. It's like, well, what's the difference between rugby league, for example, and rugby union and the NFL? Is I think most people would say, well, league and union are more free-flowing sports. They're more the ball's in play a lot longer. It's not stop and start. You have a lot more innovation, therefore. Similar to, like, basketball is similar. There's a lot of innovation that goes on in basketball beyond the plays that are designed because, I mean, the ball's bouncing unpredictably. You got to be able to play off the cuff as well. That's not really the case in the NFL where everything is so rigidly designed, which means, and the positions are split up, and that means that players are pretty much just, like, told what to do, so there's not a huge amount of critical thinking. Even from quarterbacks who have these enormous playbooks that they've got to learn and all that kind of thing. Even there, at the most innovative position, you're still not getting that much innovation. Nothing compared to what a halfback in rugby league or a first five or whatever, or a fullback in union would be going through. So I think when you get a lot of like lack of critical thinking, you get a lot of people doing what they're told to do. I think that leans a lot more towards a conservative political base. I'm reading a real good book at the moment about the Golden State Warriors, Ethan Sherwood-Strauss's one, and the sort of making and breaking of that. And there was a point in there where he sort of went on a tangent about Joey Bosa. Do you know Joey Bosa, one of the top defensive players in the NFL, plays for the 49ers. And when he was drafted, there were like sort of pro-Trumpian tweets on his account that got deleted on his Twitter account. And there was a bit of drama about that and whether he's might be a racist or whatever. It's like, first of all, like, I get pretty sketchy whenever people drag up like tweets from when someone was like 14 or whatever. It doesn't really count anymore. Like, you got to give people a chance to grow and learn and become more empathetic humans. But also, like, the point that was made in the book is the NFL kind of brushed it under the table without doing too much about it because, like, it would have been hypocritical to ice him out the way maybe it might have happened in the NBA because there's a lot of people who would hold similar opinions, and they don't go out there throwing their opinions out there. But just look at what happened to Colin Kaepernick, because he would never have been isolated the way and, blacklisted the way he was in the NFL if he were an NBA player. Like, there's just a very different base there, and I think that sort of like rigid, overly strategic, segmented way of playing and way of thinking in the NFL probably leans more towards a right-wing political view anyway. That's just a theory anyway, that I sort of got there thinking about the differences between that and, for example, union and league, which even then we could say it's a different kind of conservatism, but like rugby league in Australia is pretty conservative, a lot of old boys club stuff, and union is exactly the same in New Zealand as well. So I don't know if there's just something about taking a lot of hits to the head or something. Yeah, I don't know.
So just going back to the American Sports League, I listened to, there was a UFC fight card yesterday that no one needs to worry about. But Dana White, the boss of UFC, he was asked is there any advice or for other leagues who are trying to start, or what have you seen? Because the UFC did it pretty well, and then other leagues are kind of struggling. And Dana White said, you need the bubble. Like, without the bubble, it's not going to work. So for our listeners, keep that in mind. NBA has a bubble. MLB completely is fucking around. They're stupid and they're having serious issues. We wait and see like what the NFL does. I think NHL is back, just as far as like the major USA competitions go. So, but Dana White explicitly said you need a bubble if you're trying to start. So just keep that in mind moving forward. I've got another idea about you're a big NFL fan in New Zealand, so I don't want to project this too much, but I've got an idea that because NFL is big in Aotearoa, but I think a lot of Kiwi NFL fans, they fall in love with the cultural, not necessarily like the redneck, conservative culture, but the more just an NFL as a culture. Like a lot of the Kiwi fans, I think they appreciate and like the NFL more for like what the NFL is and how it's served up. They don't necessarily,
the language, the style, the history, all that kind of stuff.
All of that stuff, comes together. It's not necessarily because NFL is just a way better sport. I think we talked about it in the USA with how ingrained it is in the culture, and I think that is a similar reason as to why a lot of fans in Aotearoa do like the NFL, because it is a massive market here as well. Radio Wildcard, fuck all that. Let's talk about some music and podcasts and shit before we get into the Kiwi sporting matters. Couple of new songs. We've done our albums, so I think we've talked about our albums from July a fair bit. Just a couple of songs that I've chucked into our weekly playlist that will be published later today. There's a little project from Dom Kennedy, very laid-back West Coast rapper that usually serves up a good vibe. Travis Barker teamed up with Run the Jewels. Run the Jewels just dropped Run the Jewels 4. And then some new tracks appeared on Travis Barker's YouTube page, so check out that. Benny the Butcher, part of Griselda Records. He's got his own little imprint, Black Soprano Family, and they released a project as well, which is alright. Don't mind it. Russ always releases new music, so I'm chuck that up in there. And then there's this dude, Adam Snow, spelt as you would expect. He's teamed up with Freddie Gibbs a couple of times recently, which when you're an unknown and you're teaming up with a heavyweight like Freddie Gibbs, that always catches the attention. And then there's a dude out of New York, Bodega Bams, Puerto Rican, dude from New York, part of the extended kind of Beast Coast crew with Pro Era, Flatbush Zombies, those type of characters. So check out those bangers. The latest videos on the lounge page as far as music videos go. Diggy Dupe, one of Aotearoa's finest hip-hoppers. He released another video that's on Team. Logic's got a new video, Aquarius 3. New Action Bronson video, which always goes down well as well. I think it's called Latin Grammys. Very entertaining video. One of the Pro Era members, Nick Caution, got a new video as well. And then the latest video from Currency and Harry Fraud, Cutlass, or Convertible Cutlass, or something like that. So that Currency and Harry Fraud project was probably my favorite project album from July, closely followed by the Logic album, his retiree album. And as far as podcasts, it's actually interesting you mentioned the Golden State Warriors book, because this morning I was listening to the latest Woj pod with Golden State Warriors GM Bob Myers, which is always a very interesting listen. Obviously, the Golden State Warriors aren't in the NBA bubble. They're chilling. So watch out for the Golden State Warriors next season, because you're going to have Steph Curry healthy. You're going to have Klay Thompson healthy. And on the back of their, minor dynasty, which is pretty tiresome, as you see with their results and how things ended there, I think not being in the bubble is going to be fantastic for the Golden State Warriors moving forward. So check out that Woj pod with Bob Myers, the big boss man of the Golden State Warriors. And then wildcard, finally, I've got the latest Joe Rogan experience with David Cho. Yeah, David Cho, sorry, who is
I nearly threw you on that one, eh? Because you asked me before we recorded if I knew David Cho, and I thought you meant David Chang.
Not to be confused with another Korean-American David Chang, and this is, I went down this rabbit hole in the email where I just connected the dots with a lot of Korean-Americans. I'll start with David Cho here. I'll just go hard and fast through this, and then we'll get to the loungy content that the wildcard has been enjoying. David Cho, I think this was his 4th episode on the Joe Rogan Experience, but it was his first episode in 5 or 6 years. David Cho is an artist. He did a lot of early work for Vice as well. And it's a fascinating conversation. David Cho, bit of a tortured soul, but really interesting, amazing stories. Some of his stories from hitchhiking and being in the Congo jungle and all this crazy shit. That dude has lived a life. So check out the latest Joe Rogan Experience with David Cho, and then go back and watch a few of his previous episodes as well. But the email talking about the Korean Americans, you mentioned David Chang, restaurateur. He's got a few Netflix shows as well, so go down the David Chang rabbit hole if you do enjoy food. Another one is Roy Choi, who started the Kogi taco truck in LA, and he is a very talented food dude as well. Personally, I always watch Bobby Lee, Tiger Belly. He's another Korean American, and then Bobby Lee's brother Steve Lee does a show called the Stevie Weeby Show. And to wrap it, come full circle here, wildcard, Stevie Weeby, a couple years ago, he did a podcast with David Cho, and it was a 3.5 hour extravaganza, 3-part series that you can watch on YouTube. So check all that out if any of that tickled your fancy. Wildcard, what's been top of your mind, top of your ears, top of your eyes over the past week or so?
Yeah, I'll come back to that last point in a sec, but I've been just sort of burning through my last couple albums that I wanted to review. We talked about a few of them last week. The new Margo Price one is another one. There's also a Neil Young album, which has been sitting in the sheds for I think close to 45 years, which he just got to the point where it was he had a fully finished album, and he was like, you know what, I'm not really feeling this one. I want to put out, it was recorded in the process of his divorce from, I think, his first wife. And so it was kind of like a bubbly-ish kind of slightly country feel, kind of close to his, close to what he was doing with Harvest, but, which was his biggest selling album. But then, not only did he actually get divorced afterwards, it has some dark tones as well. It's not like a bubbly album. It just has that initial veneer, and then you realize the lyrics are about love dying and whatever. And then he sort of went through some more, after getting divorced, he also had, I think his roadie, who's one of his best mates, died, and then he had his guitarist from Crazy Horse died in a similar time, like both overdoses, I'm pretty sure, and he just went into an even darker, more like just a very dark place, and he instead released Tonight's the Night, which is probably my favorite Neil Young album. Real sparse and just ruthlessly like cuts to the soul kind of thing. But this album, he never ended up getting around to releasing it. It's finally seen the light of the day in 2020. Supposed to have come out in like 1975 or something, and it stacks up. It's hard to know how it would have been received had it been released contemporaneously. Like, I don't know if it would have been treated like a classic at the time, or if it just feels more like a lost classic because it sounds like what he was doing there, but maybe it would have been overshadowed by the other albums he was making at that time. I don't know. Like, he was just a relentlessly creative, he still is actually a relentlessly creative dude. So, I'm always on board with a bit of classic Neil Young. Couple albums I haven't got around to listening to yet. There's a new one by Charlie Crockett, who's an American folk singer who's very good. He's always got something on the works. He's another one of those prolific guys. Haven't heard that yet, and also extremely pumped to get around to listening to the new Fontaines DC album. Irish band who just play some outstanding modern rock and roll. And then the other one, which was last week, there was a single release for the new Fuzz album, Fuzz 3, which is Ty Segall, Charles Moothart, and I can't remember the other fella's name, but just a bunch of those sort of San Francisco garage rock, just fiends, doing like some early Black Sabbath type impersonation, but like reinventing it and making it their own. And I don't know, Fuzz 2 is one of my favorite albums of the last 10 years. It's been about 5 years since they put out the second one. And so the first single came out for Fuzz 3, and I'm pretty pumped for that one down the line. You mentioned podcasts as well, so I should check out some podcasts that I've been listening to. I'm getting back into the House of Strauss because I'm listening to reading Ethan Sherwood Strauss's Golden State Warriors book, on which Bob Myers is a regular feature. Also a lot of stuff about Kevin Durant in there, which is very interesting, coming into like his current context post the book, being with the Brooklyn Nets and Sean Marks and all that. Very interesting. The other one I've started listening to recently is Tim Heidecker's Office Hours, which is very good. And I don't know, other than that, it's just mostly the same old stuff. The Ringer's got a Wire re-listen podcast with Jamel Hill, who's always brilliant, and Van Lathan, who I hadn't heard before, but is also brilliant on this. So I've been burning through those ones too. Nicely coinciding with the fact that I have been rewatching The Wire over the last few months too, since lockdown. I'm in between seasons. I haven't decided to get back into. I'm sort of having a break before going into season 5. I will get onto that in the next couple of weeks. But that's more. Oh, and the good old Grateful Dead podcast. I'll chuck that one out there too, because that's new and I wasn't expecting it. Like when you get those sort of because I mean Grateful Dead was a band, but they're a long time since they were an actual band. In fact, it was Jerry Day a couple of days ago. Jerry Garcia's birthday. Or would have been his birthday, were he still with us. But yeah, when you get those, like at this point, you're talking about a brand rather than a band. And when you get those brand approved kind of podcasts and content kind of thing, often it tends to be pretty watered down, like not that interesting, very much there to serve a purpose. But I really like this one. They broke it down in a way that I haven't, like they're doing a series about the Working Man Dead album, and they're sort of going track by track, breaking down the writing of the track and the context of it and stuff in a way that I haven't heard another music podcast do to that level since. I don't know if you listen to the Dissect podcast, which they have different seasons. They've done about 5 or 6 of them now, where they just track by track break down everything to do with like a major modern hip hop album. So they've done a couple Kendrick Lamar ones. They've done I think the most recent series was Beyonce's Lemonade album. There was a Lauryn Hill one. There was a Tyler the Creator season, a Frank Ocean season, a Kanye West season. I think that's all of them. That podcast is amazing. Like the level of detail they go to into breaking down individual samples and how songs are written and the lyrics and the meanings behind them and everything is incredible. But I haven't actually listened to that one for a little while. So that's more or less where I'm up to on a listening thing. I will check out though, I realized while you're talking about David Cho that I do know exactly who he is, because he was on one of the outstanding, most memorable episodes of Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown, and I think a few of the other fellas you're talking about, sort of those LA-based Korean American creatives and food types, were also featured on that episode. So shout out to the long lost Anthony Bourdain, gone but not forgotten.
Definitely. So they all kind of stem from the Anthony Bourdain kauri tree, and David Cho got pretty emotional talking about Anthony Bourdain. Like, it was like 3.5 hours into the Joe Rogan episode, so it was a pretty deep episode. But it's 2 days old and it's already got over 2 million views, so pretty cool. Fantastic wildcard. We better get on to some shit we know about, and that is Kiwi sport. We are going to go hard and fast just with some little current eventy kind of stuff here, and then we'll go deep. So with Steven Adams has played one game in the NBA bubble, rocking that Kia Kaha on the back of his jersey, 27 and a half minutes. He scored 16 points, 11 rebounds, most of which were defensive rebounds. He had a couple of blocks as well. How did you assess Steven Adams in that first game? Did you see anything different, or was it just more a case wildcard of Steven Adams picking up where he left off, doing the same old job? And on top of that, has seeing the Oklahoma City Thunder play a game, has that... Because I'm pretty fucking excited about the Oklahoma City Thunder right now. They've won their last 4 games. They were on a 3-game winning streak prior to the lockdown, prior to the pandemic. And then they got a win over the Jazz here. So based off that first game, do you have any different ideas about where the Oklahoma City Thunder rank coming into like finals, playoffs basketball?
Yeah, I mean, they looked good, man. They looked really good, and Steven Adams looked really good, and like they just it's hard to say after one game because you don't know how other teams are going to react to the bubble and just the situation. Like the Jazz they were in their second game actually, the Jazz, but they didn't look fantastic. Donovan Mitchell missing a lot of shots. Rudy Gobert comfortably outplayed by Kiwi Steve there. So maybe they're just a team that isn't as well suited to this, I don't know, this type of atmosphere. I'm not sure. Maybe they need a bit of the crowd, like just spurring them on into those defensive shutdown kind of Jazz that they could be. But the Thunder also just played excellently. Like Chris Paul was, you don't necessarily see it from the stats, but he was absolutely majestic in that game. Like he just had the whole thing on a string. And then when he's playing like that, you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander free to do what he wants. Neo Gallinari's got them off to a good start scoring. He picked up a few points. Like they spread it out really nicely. And Steven Adams was like, I mean, he's not doing anything different, but I think he is doing everything just a little bit better because, I mean, of all the players, like you got to look at him and say he's the one who is, you know, a bit of an injury-plagued season, he missed only a handful of games through injury, but he's played through injury a lot throughout the start of the season. It definitely hampered him. So for him to have like had this extended break just to be completely fit, to come in like absolutely like hit the ground running kind of thing, and he looked so energetic, he looked so sharp. He was shooting the ball well. He was being a presence at both ends. Like he was great. Like there was a bit of a sort of, I don't know, a channel of thinking already that this was the kind of thing that he would be a player who was boosted by it. And I think so far you got to say the eye test backs that up. He was very good in those scrimmage games. Really good hair. Remember, like 16 and 11. Is already above, I think he was averaging about 14 and 10 or something for the season. So that's already above his season averages, and he didn't barely even have to play in the fourth quarter. Like, they still got him rest. He only played, 27 minutes. So, I mean, that's because they blew the Jazz out far enough. They could run the reserves through most of the last, 10 minutes or so of the game. So, I mean, it's best case scenario for Steven Adams. He looked fantastic, and he also didn't have to overexert himself. Best case scenario for the Thunder because they looked fantastic and got a very comprehensive victory. As to how far they can take it. I mean, this is important. Like, this is important that they can win these games, that they start quickly, that they can potentially sneak up as high as maybe third, potentially even second, but I wouldn't bet on that because the Clippers also look imperiously good right now. Or they did the other day, and lost a very close one to the Lakers before that, but those are the two best teams in the West. So I don't see the Thunder. I mean, they're going to make a tough playoff series of whoever they end up against, and they're probably going to win a first rounder if they can get into the top four as well. Potentially, at least. It depends. If they can get third, I would back them. But yeah, it's difficult to see how that works within the context of the rest of the Western Conference is all, just because of the early stages in the bubble, and because you don't know how different teams will be affected and how they'll perform, and whether they'll need a few games to get running. But the Thunder, who don't have a lot of wiggle room in terms of moving up, because you definitely don't want to move down. They can't really finish any lower than, realistically, I don't think they'd finish any lower than 7th, but you don't want to finish 7th because if you meet the Clippers in the first round, you're in a bit of trouble. So on that note, everything was just a perfect first game for them. Everything worked out the way they wanted it to work out. All their important players looked sharp, looked on top of things, and they just got to keep winning a few of these games and hope they can edge their way up just a little bit, just enough so that they can get a more favorable first round playoff series, get up to where they can, if you can meet those Lakers Clippers teams deeper in the playoffs, you're in a better place. I don't see them matching up that well against them, but I think they can match up against most any other team in the Western Conference, playing like they did there, if they can sustain that. So it's all, like you, I'm very excited about what this Thunder team can do. I don't want to make predictions of them going deep or anything, but I definitely just want to watch them and see how they do it, because I think they're an interesting team. I think they're quite well coached, compared to, Billy Donovan probably had some criticism in recent years, just because when you've got Russell Westbrook, you sort of got to let him coach the team. At times, I think he's done an extraordinary job with a more sort of democratic mode of setting his team up, and having a more deferring point guard in Chris Paul, who knows how to bring everyone else into the action and all that. Everything's set up nicely for them to be the kind of team that nobody wants to play in the playoffs. Whether they can actually make a deep run, I don't know, but they don't need to. They've already performed ahead of expectations, so it's going to be fun to watch one way or another there, dog.
Radio, we've got the start of the LPGA, restart of the LPGA, and Lydia Ko is competing. The event we have now is in Ohio. It is the Drive On Championship, Toledo, Ohio. And at the time of recording, we are after the third round, so still got one round to go, and Lydia Ko is tied for 28th. Bit of a niggly second round. Put Lydia in a spot of bother. First round, she was pretty good, 3 under. Second round, she ballooned out to 5 over, and then she got it back down to 4 over after, what did she have, 4 bogeys and 2 double bogeys in round 2, and then she had 3 bogeys, 4 birdies in round 3. So Lydia Ko still has a round to play there, tied for 28th. A success here, I reckon, is Lydia Ko finishing in the top 20. That would be excellent. And this is very interesting because it's full steam ahead in the LPGA. There is another tournament in Ohio the back end of this week. And then apparently there's 2 tournaments in Scotland after that. And then they come back to the USA with a tournament in Arizona later on in August. So that is 5 tournaments straight up, back to back to back to back to back. And if Lydia Ko can get a top 20 finish here, I think it's going to be good. Remember, Lydia Ko, we're not holding her to the same standards that she once was. She's just battling away, full of positivity, full of a fantastic mana for Lydia Ko, and still battling inconsistent golf. Hence, a top 20 finish here will be very interesting. So, I'll be all over that overnight Monday coming into Tuesday. Check the social media for any updates there. And then finally here, wildcard, a bit of cricketing news. So initially and officially, the only Kiwis we had in the Caribbean Premier League were Glenn Phillips, Ross Taylor, Colin Munro, Tim Seifert, and Ish Sodhi. They were picked up in the official CPL draft. All the official news had those players listed. And then late last week, some bits and pieces started floating around the interwebs. And now we've got Mitchell Santner and Corey Anderson. They're playing for Barbados. Nick Kelly joins Ish Sodhi for St. Kitts and Nevis. And then Scott Kugelheim is playing for St. Lucia. On top of this, Mitchell Santner is going to go then to the IPL. Ish Sodhi is also going to the IPL, but he has a spin coaching job in the IPL. And in the IPL this year, you've got Lockie Ferguson, Jimmy Neesham, Trent Boult, Mitchell McClenaghan, and Kane Williamson. So very busy T20 times ahead for a couple of these lads. Personally, I'll write about the CPL as that begins. But right now I'm fascinated to see what Nick Kelly does. Very good Super Smash last summer. And he is someone who could boost his T20 stocks and boost his general cricketing stocks leading into the domestic summer with a really good CPL. Also Scott Kugelheim, is Scott Kugelheim, does he still consider himself a Blackcap, top tier seamer? Because many people around Aotearoa probably wouldn't put him in that bucket, but he gets fairly consistent selection, inconsistent game time, but he is one of my players to watch this summer as far as the movers and shakers go, because I think there's a couple of bowlers who might overtake Scott Kugelheim. And then it goes without saying, Corey Anderson's back. Where does he rank? And as far as cricket goes, we barely see Corey Anderson play cricket these days. So it's under the radar. It's simmering under the radar, but really interesting things to come later this month in the Caribbean Premier League. And then moving towards the IPL. Although wildcard, I've got to be honest here, bit of fuck the IPL vibes here. Bit of fuck the BCCI coming on here, because they decided to schedule their women's IPL thing in the UAE at the same time as the Women's Big Bash League. So a lot of the players were very vocal, on the old Twitter, against this. Susie Bates chimed in. I think you had Alyssa Healy chime in. A couple more Australian players chime in who have the bigger platforms, who are more internationally known. They chimed in. Shit move from the BCCI, who obviously only care about themselves, and it, puts a lid on what the best female cricketers in the world can do, because they got to choose between the Indian women's competition or the Women's Big Bash League. And considering I think there's a lot of shit around the BCCI in the international landscape at the moment. We don't need to go deep down there. It's just something to pay attention to as the world around us, the world as we know it, is crumbling. And I would throw in the BCCI's power play status as one of these old organizations that might crumble along with it. Maybe that's just me hoping it happens, but a couple of interesting things happening there for the women's game as well, wildcard.
Yeah, well, the BCCI were also, in the end, it didn't matter because there's just not really any possibility of being able to host a 2020 World Cup this year. But the BCCI from day one were very keen to push that World Cup away, so that they could take that window for the IPL, which is basically what's happened as well. So there's, I can see that. I can see a bit of sort of simmering, discontent from. Well, I mean, the one odd one there is pissing off Australian cricket, when Australia has been part of the big three along with England and India, that's kind of dominated the decision making in the ICC for the last 5 to 10 years, which is a strange one because India doesn't really want to necessarily isolate itself, although maybe they feel with a billion strong customer base, perhaps they can. I don't know. Strange one when the politics get in the way, isn't it?
And bit of housekeeping. Like, I'm not going to cover the IPL because what happens is the Kiwis play 1 or 2 games, maybe 3, maybe 4, and it's just it's impossible to gauge where they're at as cricketers from the IPL compared to the CPL, where like Colin Munro, Ish Sodhi, Mitchell Santner, even Corey Anderson, Ross Taylor, all those dudes are going to play every game, and then you've also got scope for a couple of younger players to come in. Guys like Tim Seifert, guys like Nick Kelly. So it's just a more fun situation for me covering it, and that's where I'll put my effort. Radio Wildcard, let's go. Let's go deep into the NBL here. Otago Nuggets are champions. Massive game from Jordan Ngatai. Like, did he end up with like an MVP nod there, Wildcard? Like a finals MVP? Did they do that?
They did do that, but the finals MVP was given to Jordan Hunt, which was just a delightfully kind of, the word I used in the email today was quirky, like a delightfully quirky outcome for a delightfully quirky season where everything was a little bit like wonky and whatever by necessity. But the reason this was quirky for Jordan Hunt to get it is because he gets finals MVP. I think he might have topped, I can't remember, I'll check the scorecard in a sec, but led the Nuggets to victory, Otago Nuggets' first ever championship, and he's never even been to Dunedin. He has now because the whole team went down there, but yeah, how good's that? Like, what a great reflection of a crazy and enjoyable season that the finals MVP for leading the Nuggets to their first ever title, and he'd never even been to Dunedin until after they won the championship.
Yep, so he had 21 points. Ngatai had a couple of like LeBron moments in that final, so that's where the headline catching goes there. I was watching this game, Wildcard, and I was just looking at that Manawatu team, and I was thinking, like, for much of that game, I just thought Manawatu was going to win because, I mean, Tom Vodanovich played 40 fucking minutes. Holy shit. Just because what they do. Like, Hiram Harris is literally everywhere. Hiram Harris, if you do not know who Hiram Harris is and you're a Kiwi sports fan, check this dude out because he is I don't want to use the word psycho, but he's a bit of a basketball psycho. He is everywhere. Points, rebounds, steals. He does everything. So they can give the ball to him. He can do a move. Vodanovich, he can shoot 3-pointers. He's got all the moves down low as well. Bit of mid-range. Jaden Bazant runs the point. And then chuck it down to Tane Samuel. And he's just going to beat someone up. So I was just thinking, like, how do you stop the Manawatu Jets with all their options and all their good players and just what they can do? Otago Nuggets had Jordan Hunt and Kane Keel as just two kind of bigger dudes who were very effective. And then old Aitchison. There's a lot of ballers in the NBL who, if you saw them in the street, you'd have no idea that they played basketball. And I think Joshua Aitchison is one of those dudes. So shout out to him. And Ngatai and Kenny leading the way as far as mana and leadership goes for the Otago Nuggets. How did you view this final? Like, what did you see anything? What was the major difference you saw in how Otago played that gave them the nod there?
Yeah, I thought it was, and this is not at all a unusual thing for a grand final. This tends to be the case. I thought it was a grand final that was decided by 4 quarters of excellent defense from, like, both teams were defensively very good. Like, neither team got to 80 points in the end. So that tells a bit of a story in itself. Like, the way they both defended was a major aspect, and then to that you just have to add a bit of fourth quarter nuggetry on offense. using the American parlances for the basketball. That's basically how it worked. Like you, I thought the Jets were probably going to win because they led for most of the way. Ngatai barely played in the second quarter because he had a bit of foul trouble. But when he came back, he only ended up with 11 points. But I mean, defensively, and like you said, a couple of them like very important buckets laid on, and defensively he was fantastic. Defensively, Jared Kenny's always fantastic. He's just a veteran who's not going to give you an inch. And yeah, like it wasn't much of a. I think they only they used about 10 players looking at this, but only 6 players played more than 6 minutes. So it was mostly a 6-man rotation there. And the Nuggets just grounded out. Like they showed the quality beyond the top couple players that they've got, which is always important. And they made it tough for Tane Samuel, who's been just like bossing fellas in the paint throughout this entire season. The young player of the tournament, I think he shot 4 of 16. So even with even with Tom Vodanovic and Hiram Harris just playing excellent games themselves, Jaden Bazan as well, 4 of 15, shooting for 9 points. You can put a lot of that on Jared Kenny and Jordan Ngatai's shoulders as well, and the way that backcourt is just. You don't get a better defensive backcourt in this league than those two. So that was the difference. That was the difference, is that the Nuggets just held them when they weren't getting everything the way they wanted to. They just made sure it was a difficult, grinding defensive game, which they were well suited to, and then they came up with the clutch scoring when they needed it, and that is how you win a grand final. That is how you win a championship. So yeah, shout out to the Otago Nuggets, which, like, another beautiful quirk of their story was that they weren't even going to be a part of it. Like, they hadn't been a part of the NBL since 2014 for, basically financial reasons. They'd organized to come back, they got it all sorted, but they weren't going to come back till 2021. Like, next season was when they were going to come. They only jumped the gun because of the opportunity that arose with the shortened league a little later in the year. So they got ahead of it. A couple other teams pulling out as well made it a bit easier. So the Nuggets re-enter the NBL and then win the championship. Like, they weren't even going to be a part of this 2020 season if it had happened normally. Instead, they ended up winning the championship. Like, that's crazy. That's amazing. That's beautiful. That's like sport at its most beautiful there. It's wonderful to see. And then everyone like gone crazy and celebrating afterwards and showing how important it is, even though it was a shortened season, a sort of tricky season in a lot of ways, and everything happening in Auckland rather than in the furthest south team ended up winning it as well. Another little quirk. So, yeah, wonderful. It was bloody awesome. I thought it was a fantastic exhibition for that grand final, like a great game for the neutral, just as far as entertainment goes, and then worthy champion. It was going to be a worthy champion either way because the two best teams made the final. But yeah, a worthy spectacle, a worthy champion, and just lovely basketball.
If you say, I don't know how to set this up, but is there who just like your favorite player, but in a sense because I know if there's nothing else. The reason I'm struggling here is I know if there's nothing else to watch, you're going to watch New Zealand NBL regardless. Like, knowing you're going to flick it on, you're going to watch it. But is there a player who, would just be mandatory viewing? Like, if you knew this player, or these two players, or whatever, if you knew they were playing, mandatory viewing from this, LPL, NBL campaign. Are there any players in that category, just the most fun to watch, guys you had to watch, guys you had to see in action in the Aotearoa NBL over the past 2 months?
Yeah, it was 1.5, 6 weeks, I think they went for. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because there certainly is one name in particular that springs to mind, and I didn't want to mention him in the last bit I was just talking about, because I wanted to give the Nuggets their due. I didn't want to, cut back to the Manawatu Jets for a second there. But there are other players as well. From the start, I really wanted to see someone like Tane Murray, who, up and comer, sort of at that pre-USA college age, where you got a lot of guys who came back and did good things coming after college. But Tane Murray, a guy a few years earlier, he's only just finished high school, or is just finishing high school, I forget which. And like, I wanted to see what the buzz was about there. I wanted to see the buzz on someone like Isaiah Marihuhu Liafa as well, like see what he's up to. I definitely wanted to see guys like Ngatai and Vodanovic and how they would respond to being free agents in the Australian NBL, having been released by the Breakers. They both, like all of those players, responded excellently, gave you exactly what you wanted to see. But as the course of the season went on, and as Hiram Harris missed a fair bit of time in the middle there, once he came back, I had an extra little bit of a focus on him because I realized I just hadn't quite paid enough attention to him at the start. And like the way he played in the final, the way he played throughout the playoffs, the way he played down like in the last couple of regular season games, like you already said that he is appointment viewing basically, and he just is, man. He's so like he's so athletic that he can get to the rim, he can do all those things, but it's defensively that I enjoyed watching him the most. Like he's just a mastermind for a steal. He just gets his hand in there clean every time, pokes the ball away. So many like just reads the game so well, but he's also just such a like if he'd played the full season, I think it was Liafa and Kenny shared the Defensive Player of the Year. Hiram Harris played the full season, he would have to be in there. He rebounds well above his height and size as well. Like he was just, to watch him play in the last few games of that season was immense, and he was outstanding in the final as well. Like he's, if you're playing against a guy like that, you just don't want him anywhere near the ball. Like you're going to the exact opposite side wherever he might happen to be posted up, because you don't want him getting anywhere near within reach, because he's just going to take that ball away from you. And even then, if you try to throw a pass around, he's going to read it, jump the gun, and run off with it. Like defensively, he was incredible. And then he brings a fair bit of that like athleticism and bounce as well to the way he plays on offense, the way he moves, and the way he can get to the rim. Like if Hiram Harris was a development player last season with the Illawarra Hawks, I don't know what's going on with the Hawks at the moment, because they've obviously got new ownership, and LaMelo Ball is not going to be hogging absolutely all of the limelight this season, so they'll be definitely going in a different direction. What that means for whether they might want to retain someone like Harris, I don't know. But I would be, I'd be upset. I wrote about this in the email as well, like looking at who's already signed for the Aussie NBL for as far as Kiwi players go, and looking at a few players who I would like to see get opportunities. And Liafa was one of them. I want to see Jared Kenny back in there for sure. Vodanovic is definitely deserving of another opportunity, especially showing this new version of himself where he's just like this gun shooter from range. There's a few, and definitely Hiram Harris is on that list too. I would be upset, to be honest, if he doesn't get a NBL contract, whether that's, I don't know if that would be, like, I'm trying not to just look to the Breakers to be, it's easy to say like, oh, the Breakers should sign him, but it's like, well, I would enjoy watching him play just as much if he signed with Perth or Cairns or Adelaide or whoever. Like, I just want to see him at that level playing, and playing hopefully semi-regularly. And yeah, I'd be a little upset if he doesn't get that opportunity this season. There's a lot of free agency to go, so that's why I sort of broke it down on the email today, to see how things are going and where the prospects might be for further Kiwi players, because it was an incredible, like, a real golden season last year, actually. There was 17 New Zealanders, including development players, on the books of NBL teams last year. I think there was 7 from the Breakers, 10 from the rest of the league. So it's not like the Breakers have to be the only team out there offering Kiwis opportunities, because they're getting opportunities all across the league as well. Someone like Yanni Wetzel is the first new player, unless you count Ty Webster as well, I suppose you should. But Yanni Wetzel has signed with Southeast Melbourne, where Judd Flavel is an assistant coach, so that's another aspect, as he got Kiwi assistant coaches at a few of these other teams, plus Dean Vickerman, Andre Lamanis, who've had a lot to do with Kiwi basketball in the past. I assume they're still at those teams. I haven't actually looked into that detail yet, but there's opportunities across the board for sure. Aussie NBL teams have been watching the Kiwi NBL over the last 6 weeks, and they'll know exactly who Hiram Harris is. They'll know exactly who Isaiah Leafa is. They'll know exactly who Tom Vodanovic is. All those kind of guys. It's just a little bit of a wait and see now to see what which players actually get picked up. It's an ongoing process. The old Aussie NBL free agency.
Feels to me a bit like a couple years ago with the NRL, and just in the sense that there was a bit of an awakening in my mind where it was like, the Warriors are cool, but there's also so many other Kiwi, whether they be Pakeha, Māori, Samoan, Tongan, Cook Island. There's just so many with the Australian clubs that you start to realise the overall influence, and I think that's where basketball in New Zealand is getting to, with just providing talent for all Australian NBL teams, as well as the world. And I was watching the Tall Ferns showcase prior to that final wildcard, which ended up being a bit of a blowout win, but it was a showcase of the female basketball talent in Aotearoa, and one of the major sports stories in Aotearoa over the past 5 to 10 years has been the growth of basketball. And you can look anywhere, there's heaps of stats about participation numbers and the growth of the secondary schools tournament and all that stuff. I just want to encapsulate this idea and this discussion into one thing here, Wildcard. Do you think female basketball is on I'm not saying they're at any stage of this path or this journey, but do you think female basketball and basketball in general is on a path to offering far more competition to netball in Aotearoa?
Well, that's an interesting one. I suppose you'd have to say it is. There's definitely an undoubted swelling in basketball as a grassroots sport. Not just at the top level, we're seeing it coming through to the top level, because that always will be the case. If the foundations are there, then more players are going to get higher up and more opportunities, and they'll develop further and all that. We're definitely seeing that on the top end. That for example, there's a guy called Steven Adams playing every bloody game in the NBA right now, but there's also this. All these players, all these Kiwi players, record number of Kiwi players playing in the Aussie NBL. We've just seen the success of mostly New Zealand only NBL, which was still at the level that it was, despite having basically no imports, and that maybe wouldn't have even been possible a few years back. So without a doubt, there's basketball as a sport in general is growing. All those examples I just mentioned are male examples, but you think of how many players there are playing college basketball in the States. There are just as many female players as male players on that list. It's no different there. It's not like male basketballers are running away with the show. Female basketballers are getting just as many opportunities. Perhaps at the higher level there aren't as many just available opportunities because of the nature of 100 years of ingrained sexism within sports, basically. But the players coming through, the next generation is what we're talking about, and there are an equal number of female college basketballers in the States from New Zealand as there are male basketballers. So obviously, that pathway, that growth pathway, isn't failing female players on that level. So you got to think if there's this big swell of basketballers, probably would have to I don't think you can take down the it's not like where we're seeing when people tearing down racist old statues and stuff like that a couple of weeks ago. I don't quite see it on that level as trying to tear down netball, but certainly just to be a challenge. There have been examples, notable examples of players who have played for both the Silver Ferns and the Tall Ferns and stuff in the past. So I don't know. If there's I don't know what more to say other than I think there probably is a challenge.
I think there definitely is, and just where you look for players leaving school, there's those college scholarships are available to basketball players. So as long as there is a professional, the next growth spurt, because we've seen it with Women's Big Bash League, we've seen it with Women's A League, we've seen it with Women's NRL. If there is a greater professional presence in Australia and New Zealand, I think it's game over. Not game over as wiping away netball, but it's game over as far as like where basketball's come from and where they could go, because you've got that college carrot, and then you've got something professional in this part of the world to back it up as well. So if you're a young athlete, a female athlete who's capable at basketball and netball, you're thinking, okay, well, I can get a college scholarship out of basketball, and then there's a professional pathway after that as well. Whereas netball, I mean, it's played by like 4 countries, not minimal, but there's not a huge professional landscape, and you're definitely not going to America to go to college or, travel the whole world off of netball. That's not happening. But netball's, like the NFL, it's been ingrained in our culture. But yeah, very interesting. But that's only because of what's happened in basketball over the last 10 years. Like, we've both seen it, we've both felt it. It's very real. And I think there is a part of New Zealand that doesn't know that this is happening. There's parts of New Zealand where they don't know what is happening, like, at an underground level, and what the kids are into, not just kids, what the older generations who are invested in that community are into. And like, I think Casey Frank and Hugh Bainan did a great story about the Māori nationals in basketball as well. Like, so I think what I'm saying is you need the foundations for the expansion. And had basketball just popped up in the last year or so, I wouldn't be talking like this, but the foundations have been laid over, a long time, 20, 30, 40 years. And then the past 10 years, we've seen powerful steps on top of those foundations. And that's the only reason I have this mindset, is because the work's been done. And we've seen proof, we've seen growth and all that stuff. So I think it's definitely on a collision path with netball, and the more Kiwi sports that we're really good at, the better. Radio Wildcard, let's swing it into some NRL footy and keep it moving here. We had a Kiwi NRL debut. Jackson Ferris made his debut at centre for the Cronulla Sharks. They had a good win over the Brisbane Broncos, but the bro, Jackson Ferris, he only played 66 minutes before coming off injured. He did get a try and 8 runs, 114 running meters, pretty explosive, dynamic, 2 line breaks, a tackle bust, an offload, and pretty good tackling. So Jackson Ferris, he was a 2018 junior Kiwi from the Manawatu. So when you think Manawatu Jets were in the NBL Grand Final and Jackson Ferris made his debut, pretty big weekend for the Manawatu Sports. He was playing first 15 rugby for Palmerston North Boys High School, and he was a junior at Kiora Warriors down in Palmerston North. And he got recruited by the Cronulla Sharks. So he spent some time in their junior system. And then he got his debut this weekend at centre. And the Sharks actually had a all-Kiwi NRL right edge. So you had Sean Johnson and Britton Nakora both playing for the Aotearoa Kiwis. Then you had Jackson Ferris at centre. And then you had Sione Katoa, who was born in Hamilton, moved to Sydney at a young age, and he's Tongan. So I think he's going to go down the Tongan eligibility route, but he is also a former junior Kiwi himself. So that was pretty exciting to see Jackson Ferris get his debut. All up though, Wildcard, it was a weird round of NRL footy, so I don't want to get too deep into this round just because it was fucking strange. Like, the Warriors defeated the Tigers, the Titans pushed the Roosters, the Cowboys pushed the Raiders, and then you had the Bulldogs pushing the Eels as well. So it just felt Like one of those rounds where a lot of injuries, a lot of ins and outs, bit of suspension, players coming in, lots of young players, development players, like a bit all over the show. But it was engaging. It was an engaging weekend of footy, just not too much to hang my hat on as far as judgments go. I do have an interesting question that can form our NRL conversation here, Wildcard. And I think the Aotearoa Warriors have a few decisions that need to be made. They've got a lot of decisions that need to be made, not just as far as their NRL squad goes, but whatever the fuck they're doing with their junior systems and their junior pathways and all that stuff. It's very confusing because there's no clarity. So that's why I've kind of fallen back to take a more overarching perspective, just because it's hard to assess the Warriors when a lot of this stuff is up in the air. But there is a nugget here that I do find interesting, and it's just a very simple question, Wildcard. If you're the Warriors, what would you do with Blake Green and the halfback position?
I would say let it bolt and then try find free agent recruitment to replace him. He's capable of some great games. He's played a couple great games this season. He's also mostly been below par, and I don't think he's given them what they need out of him as the veteran halfback. And I'm also not sure that the Warriors' timeline is going to fit with his timeline. So I don't really see that as a convenient marriage anymore between the Warriors and Blake Green, to be fair.
So based off that, like, what are you thinking as far as the type? You don't have to mention a name, but you can chuck out examples for reference. What kind of halfback are you going to replace Blake Green with?
Well, I think you need... it's tricky, because ultimately, unless you can sign someone like big deal, you're probably looking towards growing from inwards. But if you're going to grow from inwards, there's not really anyone who's like ready to dominate an NRL game yet. So you probably need to find just someone to fill a reliable 80% kind of role, like that veteran kind of presence like Blake Green has been intended to, but just at a better value. I don't know. I mean, if Blake Green's happy to stick around, they'll probably like just roll with him a little bit further. But I don't know if he would be, and I don't know if that suits the Warriors. So they probably do need someone just to hold the fort and to be a leader within that sort of playmaking group. I have no idea who that would be, but that, that just the kind of like veteran, reliable presence, to someone to do what Jared Kenny did for the Otago Nuggets, basically.
Yeah, so it's I've tried to wrap my head around this one, and there's no one on the market who I can see going to the Warriors. So I just find it hard to see the Warriors getting a like for like replacement. Not necessarily like for like in the terms of a veteran halfback like Blake Green, but like for like in the sense that someone who is an established NRL halfback who's going to play every single week, assuming they're fit and healthy. I don't see that person out on the market, and the idea of building from within and promoting from within, if that's the case, I can see value in keeping Blake Green around. Now, obviously, Blake Green has to take a deal that is less than his current deal to stay around, because you're not paying him the same money. Like, I've talked the most shit about Blake Green as a quality NRL halfback, or lacking, or just not performing for the Warriors. So I'm definitely not a Blake Green sympathizer, but if Blake Green... So some factors that might come into play here. He's got a young family. So a young family might want to stay in New Zealand. They might be established in New Zealand. They might want to stay. Also, being a shocker of a year for everyone, So Blake Green might just think, like, I just want to re-up and help this club move forward. Any other factor that goes in to Blake Green accepting less money to stay with the Warriors and offering some like experience and guidance to the young halves, because the Warriors do have players already there who could step up. You've got Cody Nikorima, you've got Chanel Harris-Tavita, Paul Turner is on the fringe of NRL footy, and then you've got Sione Moala, who's a young halfback in the SG Ball, who I actually found out spent time with the Tongan international team last year while he was the Jersey Flegg halfback. So that tells you what you need to know about Sione Moala's talent, was that he was the under-20s halfback last year, and this year he is the under-18s halfback. Bit of a mindfuck, but very good. So the Warriors have, and Adam Kieran as well, so the Warriors have young halves there, but none of them should be leading the Warriors like this season or next season unless someone bolts out of the blue. So it's like, okay, the owner came out and said Blake Green's got to go, but I just don't see like a better alternative. Now, again, this is assuming that a different option is Blake Green accepting less money, because Blake Green also has a weird track record of just taking like the biggest deal that's available to him. But he's not putting himself like, he's not commanding the same deal with his performances right now. So no Australian club is going to offer him the same money that he's on now, because he's not commanding that. So what are Blake Green's options? Less money in Australia, which could be cool, could be fine, he is Australian after all. Or less money at the Warriors and guide those young halves moving forward. Like it doesn't seem as clear cut as the owner made it out to be, or as it seemed at like deep in those Warriors struggles a month or two ago. It was like, fuck, I just don't want to see Blake Green playing for the Warriors. And then you start to think about it and you're like, what are the alternatives? What are the options available here? And that's where you start to think about scouting and recruitment. Like one of the alternatives is you find a good halfback in Australia somewhere, whether in reserve grade or the ghost reserve grade, or on the fringe of an NRL team who is willing to come to Aotearoa, because that's another factor. Like, who's going to be willing to move to Aotearoa to compete for a half spot? I don't know. Like, it's very convoluted, and I guess my whole point here is that it just wasn't, right now in my mind, it is not as clear cut as it once seemed.
No, and that alternative of trying to find another James Maloney type, like someone who is, to talk about this in sort of the way they talk about NBA contracts kind of thing, trying to find like value on the dollar and like someone whose ability isn't being represented and their opportunities elsewhere is someone who's more likely to want to come over and make the sacrifice of moving to New Zealand. Although at the moment, let's be honest, moving to New Zealand is a bit of an enviable thing. There might be a lot of Australian players lining up for that, considering New Zealand seems to be a bit of a global paradise at the moment compared to the rest of the world, which is basically all on fire. Maybe that helps the Warriors, but I'm sort of, like, thinking about that, I'm sort of drawn to I was going to call it development. It's not really that. It's just the way that the Wellington Phoenix have addressed these kind of things over the last couple of years. There was a point with the Phoenix where probably 2 to 3 years ago, they were getting to a point where they're like, we don't really want to sign too many like New Zealand players because it's just not helping us when they have to all disappear to international breaks all at once, and then we're left like we're not getting compensation from the A-League. They're not letting us have international windows kind of thing, and we're being unfairly affected by that, so they sort of went through a season or two where they were signing a few more extra Aussie guys out of like state leagues and stuff, and I'm sure there's plenty of Australian players in the state leagues who are good enough to step up to A-League football and just aren't getting that opportunity. We are seeing a little bit more of that now where there's been more expansion. Western United coming in this season, and then next season there's this MacArthur team as well, so hopefully you see a bit of that. But like, that didn't work for the Wellington Phoenix. They weren't getting. It was one thing to say we need to, like, we're struggling by signing too many New Zealanders and being too reliant on all whites in our team. But it's another thing to then expect to be able to sign comparable players from Australia, because those guys just didn't want to come over here. They got better options from the many other A-League clubs that exist, not to mention like overseas opportunities. So the Phoenix this is when the Phoenix were in the wilderness and very much on par with where the Warriors are now and were at the same time a couple years ago. Like, it's not, they were struggling, and they were struggling to come up with answers for why they were struggling. What they ended up doing is they started coming back. Well, I think a couple things helped them in that balance, which were completely out of their control. One is that just the level of Kiwi footballers grew to where, like, now there are so many well-established professionals overseas. You don't need to be drawing too many players out of the Phoenix for an all-white squad. A first-choice all-white squad might have 3 or 4 Phoenix players. Marinovic for sure, Kakache for sure, but how long is Kakache going to be with the Phoenix? Rufa might be in the wider squad, a couple others, but like Callum McCoward would be there at the moment, but and at least one of the right backs, if not 2 of the right backs, but not to where you're suddenly crippling the team, but also they are getting, like, the A-League has finally allowed the Phoenix to have a bye or two when they do clash with an All-Whites game. The other thing is that the All-Whites don't play very many games at the moment, and haven't done for the last 2 years, so that's also a factor that's kind of eased things up. And you're seeing a good core of Kiwi players over the last year, and especially now this year, really dominating for this club. You're also seeing the kind of Australian players that they've been able to sign aren't like Mark Rudin had a couple, but like David Williams came, had a good season and left. Nathan Burns, the first time he was here, came, had an outstanding season, then left. Like, they kind of used the club as leverage in that way. Whereas now you see guys like Cam Devlin is the best example. Reno Piscopo is another one. Aussie guys who weren't getting opportunities at other teams, but are also young and hungry and more willing to kind of, like, guys who are going to be in that sort of the mold of a James Maloney player when the Warriors first signed him. I don't know. I mean, this is where this point all comes around and doesn't quite get tied up in a neat bundle, because there's a large hiccup here, which is that Ufuk Talai's transfer record this season has been the defining factor in how well the Phoenix have done. Like, everything else that he's achieved tactically as a coach, and he's been great at that, what the players have done for him and whatever, yeah, amazing. But it all started by the fact that he recruited the right players, he identified the right talent, he brought in the right guys to be the right, like, combinations with each other and all that. The Warriors, I'm not sure, have a track record at the moment of, like, being able to identify that level of talent. Like, it's easy to go after a Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. Everyone knows how great he is, and coming back to Auckland is also just a carrot on a stick for the club in order to recruit him. It's that second, like, that next tier below. Can you get that level of NRL player? Can you identify them? Can you bring them over with the right motivations? I'm just not sure the Warriors have that kind of infrastructure at the moment to be able to do that, which is tricky. And it doesn't get trickier when you don't have a head coach. I think that's kind of where the next era of the Warriors rebuild has to come from, is you just need that commanding personality to lead the way as coach. And I don't know. I don't see too many options at the moment. I'm leaning towards Paul Green, but again, it's the same situation with the Warriors finding a coach as who wants the job, you know? It's not an easy one to sell sometimes.
If you want to go there, I reckon Todd Payton will be the coach, and you said a lot of good shit in there. The only thing I'll add is that if the Warriors are going to go out and sign a young half and scout talent and all that stuff, that's where I fall back on they don't need to, because they do have guys that at least deserve an opportunity, and then that's where Blake Green comes in and helping them build that opportunity and take the most of that opportunity. But a lot of that depends on the ego and self-awareness of Blake Green, otherwise known as Kakariki. Radio Wildcard. I'm not sure this can be as brief or as deep as you want it to be. Wellington Phoenix, 1-0 loss to Western Sydney Wanderers. Western Sydney are 9th on the ladder, and they have another game this coming Wednesday against Brisbane Roar, who are currently 4th. Wellington Phoenix are 3rd. Anything of note from that Wanderers game, or was it just the banana skin?
It was a banana skin. They came up against a team that's relatively desperate to, like, on their sort of last chance to make the playoffs. They got to keep winning games, and so Western Sydney did. But at the same time, the reason they did, like, the Phoenix, oh man, they were just flat. Like, they were missing passes they should have been hitting. They were just not quite as cohesive as they have been in recent times, and before the pandemic as well. It was comfortably their worst performance of the restart. And then to make matters worse, Luke de Ver gets sent off with about 25 minutes to go. They score after the red card, and then after that, actually, once the Phoenix were down to 10 men and behind 1-0, they actually played the best football they did all game once they actually, I don't know, had something to focus on or just got sparked up a little bit more by that. Didn't get the equalizer, though, and that's frustrating because it means they played 3 pretty solid performances. There were a couple issues in closing out their first 2 games, and the third game, obviously, actually all 3 of them, because there's the missed penalty at the end of the third game as well, which could have got them a victory. And now, because, you know, you let a lead slip against, you concede a bunch of late goals anyway against Sydney, a couple tricky decisions along the way. You get a game against Perth, which they won 2-1. It should have been as close as it was. They were better than that, but they still got the 3 points. But then you also don't, you'd miss a late penalty to draw with, was it Adelaide, the game after that. And then you have a poor performance to lose to Western Sydney. It means they've only got 4 points from these 4 games. They're out there battling for second place, and the second place is crucial because to win this tournament, like, is the level of fixture congestion and whatever that's going on right now within the A-League bubble. It's not quite an A-League bubble, but everything is at least within a New South Wales bubble at the moment. Like, it's just getting that first round bye feels to me pretty essential. You don't want to risk having to go to penalty in a first round game, and then, you know, you're playing 120 minutes there plus all the stress of penalties. Even if you advance, you're playing on short notice for the next game. You're playing on short notice for the game after that. If you win that, like, it seems like a lot, and it's just you gotta balance that. They gotta find a way to get that second spot, but it wasn't made easier by the fact they lost this game, and then Melbourne City also beat Sydney, so things just got a whole lot trickier for the Wellington Phoenix because of this. And it was easy enough to excuse, like, okay, they didn't quite get the points with a second string team against Adelaide. Okay, maybe they were a bit hard done by against Sydney, but then you have a poor performance on the back of that, and then you see that they've just not put the points on the board to match the way they were playing and how well they, you know, to match what they should have got, basically. And then as a result, like, the Melbourne City game goes the wrong way, and suddenly things look a whole lot different to what they did a week ago, even. The positive to take from all this, though, is that after because the Phoenix lost their first 4 games of the season, they sort of took a little while to ease into it. Then they went on a nice unbeaten streak, and since then they've only lost 4 games out of 20. And this is the 4th loss of those 20, obviously. So the other 3 games that they lost since then, like since that poor start to the season, the other 3 games that they've lost, they rebounded with a victory the very next game. So they have been good at taking that wake-up call so far. It's a bit frustrating. This is how it got to, but there's still 6 points to gain. You just got to do what you can do. If they don't get second, they're going to have to do it the hard way because they brought it upon themselves by not maximizing their points through these first 4 games of the restart. So that's basically where the Wellington Phoenix are at. It's not a worry about how things are going. Tim Payne comes back from suspension next game. I think you'll probably see him go into. They might give him one game to play like half an hour off the bench to work his way in, but I think he's probably got to be the starter at right back. Interesting thought as to who replaces De Vere for this game at centre back, because you had McGinn coming off the bench for him. Well, not for him, but into his position after De Vere was sent off in the last game. But you also had Hudson Wihongi starting the previous game in that position. So they do have a couple options, which is nice. See how that one goes. But yeah, that's where the Phoenix are at right now. Like, just they haven't quite put the points on the board to reflect how they've been playing and how they should have been performing. But yeah. You can't go back and redo them, so you don't get to, like Football Manager, you rage quit and go back to where you last saved it. So they gotta deal with the consequences of that, and it starts with I think it's Brisbane. They play Brisbane and Newcastle in their last 2 games. I think it's Brisbane first. So, I mean, those are 2 winnable games. Get 6 points from those, take some momentum into the playoffs. If that takes you into second place, beautiful. If it doesn't, well, it's your own fault. So you just gotta deal with that extra game and hope you're in a good enough form to put it away nice and early without the extra emphasis of extra time or whatever. So, yeah, Wellington Phoenix title quest is still very much, the train is still very much on the tracks, just it's slowed down a little bit this week is all.
Onwards and upwards. Good thing is these quick turnarounds, so you can't dwell on shit in the A League.
Yep.
Your Flying Kiwis thing will be published tomorrow or Wednesday, whenever it is. What has caught your eye on this Monday?
Well, there's not been. I mean, if the Wellington Phoenix title quest train has slowed down a little bit, then the Flying Kiwis one is having like line faults and delays and stuff. There's just like a lot of those leagues that rushed back to start have now finished. Like the Premier League obviously is done. Most of the guys and all of the women based in America have finished. Some leagues are starting up again, Scandinavian stuff. You've seen a few guys in action there, a few gals in action there as well. But the new seasons, for example, like English women's football, English men's football as well, is only about a month and a half away from restarting. I think it's the 12th of September or something. The next Premier League season starts. The last one finished last week. The next one starts that soon. So, also, I'm just very much waiting for Ryan Thomas to play for PSV again. I would like to see, I think he's sort of, not slid under the radar, but he hasn't just had the same spotlight on him because of his injuries and because just as he was breaking into the first team at PSV after all that, the pandemic comes and the Dutch league got not postponed but cancelled. So they will start up at a regular time in a month or two. That's kind of where it's like, that's kind of the vibe from Flying Kiwis at the moment, is that we're sort of in between a couple different phases, like the ones that rushed back to start and then the ones that took their time to set things up for next season, when we're sort of in between those. But we do still have, I guess flying the flag right now is Michael Boxall for sure. With his Minnesota United team, they've made it into the semi-finals of the MLS is Back tournament. Always a bloody mouthful, that one. I don't know why they couldn't come up with just a snappier title for the tournament, but so it goes. And then on the other side of the bracket, Bill Tuiloma's Portland Timbers have made it through to the semi-finals as well. So they're still on track to play each other in the final there if that goes, if the results go the right way later in this week. Very much be cheering for that one. Boxall has just been a leader at the back there. The normal Minnesota centre-back pairing is Michael Boxall and a fella called Ike Opara, who was the MLS Defender of the Year last year. He's also won that was also the second time he's won that award. He won it in his, a couple years ago with a different club as well. But Opara hasn't been in the bubble. He didn't join the team in the bubble. I don't know why. I assume he had more than valid reasons. It's one of those things where like you certainly can't hold it against anyone who doesn't. And so Boxall has been kind of the main dude at centre back. He's playing with a less experienced partner and leading the way, just being excellent, playing every minute, doing what he does. Bill Tuiloma is a little different because he's like the third centre back going into a centre back pairing. So he played 2 of the group stage games. They rotated the cast so that everyone played, like each of their top 3 centre backs played 2 games. But once they got into knockouts, he went back to the bench, and they just haven't needed him as that defensive sub yet for the first 2 games of the knockouts. So haven't seen him since the group stage. But best case scenario would be, I guess, Portland wins their semi-final and one of those centre backs gets sent off. It brings Tuiloma in for the final, so he can get it, and then also Michael Boxall's team wins, and then you can get a nice head-to-head, maybe marking each other on set pieces, sort of thing. That would be a best case scenario. Not going to wish upon injuries for any professional athletes to make way for Tuiloma, but a cheeky suspension wouldn't go astray in the Flying Kiwis ranks. But that's about where we're at. That's definitely like the main focus right now is the latter stages of that MLS's back tournament, and the 2 New Zealanders who are still in the running, 2 New Zealanders who are still doing what they do there with 2 pretty strong teams, and there's your focus for Flying Kiwis. There is hoping to get a Tuiloma versus Boxall MLS Cup, MLS's back tournament grand final derby. There would be the ideal.
Lovely, a jubbly. We'll wrap it up there, Wildcard, and we'll be serving up the writing goods throughout the week. The email is live by the time you're listening to this, so sign up to that, or you can probably read it. I think if you just go through the Substack, the Niche Case Substack, you might be able to read it. Otherwise, definitely sign up and get that email header straight to your email. And we'll be writing about different sporting matters throughout the week. So kia kaha, stay beautiful, and just kia kaha. That's the theme today. It's just a bit of kia kaha. Kia kaha energies throughout the land of Aotearoa and everyone listening. Cha-cha!